Hello, Earth Science students. I want to take a little bit of time today to explain how Cornell notes might be taken. And in doing that, I've got a Cornell note page set up here, and I've already begun to fill out the heading at the top with my name and the class name and the date. I've also written in the title of this section and the section number, which came straight from my textbook, Earth System Science, section 1-4. And my teacher gave me the essential question, what we're trying to answer. And so I'm going to just paste that in here. If my teacher had not given me that, I could probably come up with something like that from the textbook itself. And that's what I've done here. I've basically taken some of the key concepts and turned it into a big question we're trying to answer. All right, so let's talk briefly about Cornell note-taking. Cornell note-taking is like any other note-taking. We're going to be writing down important things as our notes. I guess the big difference is the last two sections, which I'll show you at the end, the questions or cues that we add to our notes, and the summary that we write at the end. Okay, and we'll get into those in a minute, but let's talk about these notes. This is from a section on the Earth as a system, and we've got to look at that system and how the system components interact. So as I'm taking notes and reading this, I find out in the first paragraph, it says the Earth is a dynamic planet. It's made of different parts or spheres. Earth scientists study how they interact. And then I see something that must be pretty important because it's in bold with a little key icon next to it. It says this way of looking at Earth is called Earth System Science. Its aim is to understand Earth as a system made of numerous interacting parts. So I might write that down as my first thing in my notes, that Earth is a system of interacting parts. Okay, as I read on, I find out that they study those parts in various sciences. So I could write something like geology, chemistry, and biology, and probably others. Okay, another important idea is that Earth science is really a science made of other sciences. All right, so I'm just writing down from my text things that seem important to me in the notes section. Do want to point out one other way that you might choose to do this, which I've seen, especially with students that are just learning to take notes from their text, is you can create an outline. So Roman numeral 1 of my outline might be the big section heading for this next part that I'm going to read. And then maybe there's some subsections that I could write under here as letters. So what is a system? And again, the text kind of introduces us to some examples like a transportation system or a weather system or a solar system. Then I see something that must be important. Again, it's in bold with the key next to it. A system can be any size group of interacting parts that form something more complex. So smaller parts that form something more complex. My next sentence tells me that systems move matter or energy. So I'm going to write something about that. Energy and matter can move into or out of systems. Okay, so you can see this is another common way to take notes. If we read on, we can find out more about this idea of energy leaving or entering a system. And eventually they're going to relate this to Earth, how it receives energy from the sun, and then it loses energy as that energy radiates into space. So I could see how they're kind of building this concept and this theme of the Earth is like so many of these other examples of systems. It's just a complex thing that we can break into smaller parts. Now, as we're talking about this, I realize some of you may have studied the human body before and know that that's a great example of a system. So I'm going to let this introduce me to our next section. The questions or cues is a section of our notes when we do our Cornell note taking that is meant to be written later on. So at my first glance, looking at the text, I'm writing down notes. The idea is that I go back and I look at my notes later, and then I see if maybe it jogs anything in my memory, or maybe there's something important there that I want to turn into a question. And that's what this section is for over here. So the Earth is a system of interacting parts. That makes me think of something else that I'm going to put as a cue. The body is a system, right? It's made of um, like a digestive system and a cardiovascular system made of smaller parts. So this section off to the side can be used to write down what we call cues, or things that maybe this makes you think of. It can also be used to take further notes. Maybe it wasn't in the text that you read, but later on you go back and you read, like, what is that geology thing? Oh yeah, geology, maybe we had to look that up, studies rocks. Okay. One final thing you can do in this section, which I really like to see, is you can create your own questions from the text. So maybe I write a question down here that says, what moves into or out of a system? And the answer should be in my notes. The way I write these questions is so that if I'm looking at my notes, I can see the answer. The idea behind this is that if we had a way to cover our notes, well, it didn't work. But if I could hide that section of my notes, still didn't work. I would cover those. If they were on paper, I would cover that right half, and I would just study all of my questions in the question section and use that as a study guide in preparing for a test or a quiz. Okay, this is what I need to know. All right, let's talk about the last section of our notes. So we've got the notes that we took from our text, or if you're in class, from what the teacher said. We've got the questions and the cues that we wrote later as we went back and reviewed our notes. And then finally, we're going to summarize this section. And really, our summary should answer that big question we wrote at the top. So what was this whole reading, or maybe that whole lecture you went through? How would you summarize the main ideas in that? And for this section, I might write, the Earth is a system similar to the body being a system. It is made of many smaller parts working together. Energy and matter can enter or leave this system. And I didn't finish note taking, but I'm sure there's a few other big ideas here. Maybe they're even going to use some examples from Earth that I would include in this final summary. Okay, this is how you do Cornell notes. There's nothing magical or weird about Cornell note taking. It's just maybe notes with a little bit added to them. So we're taking notes again in our notes section. We're adding cues that we think of later, or questions that we think of later, in our questions and cues section. And then we're trying to capture all of the main ideas in a smaller fashion here at the bottom in the summary section. Hope this helps you complete assignments in your science class this year, and I look forward to reading some of your Cornell notes. That's it.